Drillbit tornadoes. Take the violent winds of a tornado and squeeze them down into a really small space, as small as a few meters wide, and you've got the drillbit tornado. A great example of a drillbit I've picked is the Ashby-Dalton, Minnesota tornado from July 8, 2020. Storm chasers who saw it in person said it was only about 10 feet wide at its smallest point, which is just crazy to think about. Drillbits are basically rope tornadoes, but with an even smaller base. They usually appear during an in-between phase in a tornado's life, when it's either about to weaken and die off, or before it becomes something much bigger. The name drillbit is honestly legit, because when you see one spinning, it literally looks like the tip of a power drill, carving into the soil. Despite their tiny size, they're often really strong. While the EF scale is based on damage tornadoes cause, it's safe to say that many drillbits can produce intense winds regardless of what they inflict, sometimes equivalent to an EF3 or higher. That's because of something called the conservation of angular momentum. Now, because the physics behind this are really complex, I'll simplify it for the sake of the video. When a rotating column of air, a tornado, shrinks in size, it has to spin faster. This causes the air to rotate really fast around the core, creating pretty powerful winds. A real-world example of this is with a figure skater. When their arms are out, they spin kinda slowly, but if they bring their arms closer to their body, they start spinning faster. It's the same physics involved. Because of their skinny size, drill bits leave really unique damage paths. You'll know if one went through. If it passes through a field, you'll see long, thin streaks where grass or crops have been completely flattened, or even soil stripped away, carving a path so clean and precise it almost looks unreal. Elephant trunk tornadoes. If you want to see one of the coolest and most special tornado shapes out there, look no further than the elephant trunk tornado. A great example of an elephant trunk I've picked is the Keensburg, Colorado tornado from June 19, 2018. This tornado is just about as picturesque as they can get. As their name gives away, these tornadoes are tall and skinny like the trunk of an elephant, narrowing smoothly from the cloud base down to the ground. They look similar to ropes, but what makes them stand out is their slightly wider, curved body that tends to bend at a sharper angle. Sometimes they even look like they sway side to side, kinda like an actual elephant's trunk moving around in slow-mo. Elephant trunks can form during the maturing stages of a tornado, when the funnel is tightening up but still maintaining that pretty, narrow shape. They're honestly eye candy. Not as skinny like a rope, but not as big like a cone or a stovepipe either. They almost always look beautiful, especially when standing out against the open plains. Storm chasers love them for that. They're one of the most beautifully sculpted tornado types you could see. Of course though, let's not forget that they're still dangerous. Elephant trunk tornadoes can pack a serious punch, with many falling within the EF1 to EF3 range. Their narrow base at ground level can create intense local winds, just like with drill bits. Multivortex tornadoes. One of the most fascinating and downright destructive types of tornadoes is the multivortex. A great example of a multivortex I've picked is the Katy, Oklahoma tornado from May 9th, 2016. You can actually see those multiple smaller vortices surrounding the tornado's center, almost like Cthulhu is trying to reach out. Now here's the thing, many, if not most tornadoes are actually multivortex. What that means is that they have these smaller whirls, basically like mini tornadoes, spinning inside the main circulation. These are called suction vortices, or more commonly subvortices, and they can be either clearly visible, like with Katy, or completely hidden, often within the larger condensation funnel. Subvortices usually form in groups of 2 to 5, though there can be as many as 6 to 7, or even more. They rarely last more than a minute, sometimes only a few seconds, before merging together, fading away, or reforming again, somewhere else in the circulation. That constant shifting makes them very unpredictable, and incredibly dangerous. A tragic example of their danger came during the El Reno, Oklahoma tornado in 2013. One of those subvortices suddenly caught the TwistX research team's car, throwing it around half a mile away and killing veteran storm chaser Tim Samaras, his son Paul, and Carl Young, another storm chaser. Subvortices are also a big reason why violent tornadoes, like EF4s and EF5s, can cause such extreme, uneven damage. They can locally boost wind speeds by over 100 miles per hour, carving narrow streaks of extreme damage right next to areas of lighter damage. Subvortices are pretty similar to drill bit tornadoes, where all that energy gets focused into tight, compact zones. They can and often will tear through pretty much anything in their way. So while not every multivortex tornado is violent, the presence of those subvortices often means you're dealing with a higher end storm. Dead man walking. Now we move on to one of the most hyped up tornado types in the entire weather community, the so-called dead man walking. And yeah, most of you probably already know what example I'm about to bring up. The infamous Gerald, Texas tornado from May 27th, 1997. In this iconic picture, the tornado literally looks like it grew legs and started walking across the landscape. Some also think the upper part of the tornado resembles a scythe blade, like the Grim Reaper himself dropped from the sky. That look is what led to it earning the Dead Man Walking nickname. Let me be honest with y'all though, I included the Dead Man Walking because of said hype, but it's actually not a type of tornado. A Dead Man Walking is really just a multivortex tornado. What you're seeing are those smaller subvortices making it look like it has legs. We see the legs because of something called pareidolia, which is a psychological phenomenon where our brains recognize familiar shapes and patterns, like with how we see faces in outlets, for example. A lot of the Dead Man Walking hype actually comes from a 1999 documentary about the Gerald tornado. In it, there's this dramatic line that the narrator says,
"An ancient Native American legend speaks of the Dead Man Walking. If you see him in a tornado, you are about to die."
This so-called legend, though, is a straight-up lie. There's no actual record of any native legend like that. If you try to look it up on Google, you'll find no reliable result. In June 1st's video on the Dead Man Walking, which by the way is absolutely worth watching if you're interested, he believes the nickname was inspired by a 1995 movie title, also called Dead Man Walking. When the documentary was made a few years later, the writers borrowed the phrase and added the Native American legend part to it just to make a more entertaining story for their audience. In the end though, a dead man walking doesn't automatically mean the tornado is super violent or anything like that. You can see a dead man walking effect with weaker tornadoes too. It's just our brains making us see the swirling subvortices as a walking man. Landspout. Let's now talk about one of the more underrated and misunderstood tornado types out there, the Landspout. A great example of a Landspout I've picked is the one that touched down in Rush County, Kansas on September 19th, 2023. It doesn't look like much, but Landspouts are riskier than you think. They look similar to typical tornadoes, and they actually are tornadoes, but they form in a completely different way. Where most tornadoes come from rotating supercells, Landspouts form from non-supercell storms. This means they don't have a clear mesocyclone, or that classic Hook echo signature you'd see on radar, making it tougher for meteorologists to issue warnings for them. Instead, Landspouts form from the ground up, usually along weather boundaries where pockets of air come together and create weak horizontal rotation near the surface. As a developing cumulus cloud's updraft forms above, it tilts the rotation and stretches it upward, becoming narrower. Thanks again to the conservation of angular momentum, the rotation spins faster, creating the Landspout. Because of how they form, Landspouts tend to be shorter-lived and weaker than classic tornadoes, usually in the EF0 to EF1 range. Of course, they can still damage the roofs of homes and cause injuries if you don't take shelter. Landspouts are yet another super photogenic tornado type. They can be tall, thin, and highly visible because they usually form without rain and pick up dust and dirt from the ground. Many storm chasers love the way they look and enjoy taking pictures and videos of them. Landspouts are the cousins of fair weather waterspouts because they form from the same basic process, just happening over land instead of water. Both heavily rely on stretching surface rotation rather than the deep, organized rotation of supercells. While most Landspouts won't sweep away homes or throw vehicles, like the violent supercell tornadoes I've talked about, they can still behave in dangerous ways. Their sudden formation and unpredictable movements make them risky for anyone nearby, especially since they can form out of innocent-looking storms. Uncondensed tornadoes. Here's another example of a dangerous tornado type that many people often misunderstand, the uncondensed tornado. A great example of an uncondensed tornado I've picked is the one that happened near Elk City, Oklahoma on May 16th, 2017, just before it became a rain-wrapped wedge. Uncondensed tornadoes are kinda weird, because they might not really look like tornadoes at first glance. You won't always see that classic dark funnel stretching down from the cloud base. Instead, they might appear as a faint swirl of dust on the ground, or even just a rotating patch of debris, without any visible connection to the cloud above. But make no mistake, they're still tornadoes. The reason they're called uncondensed has to do with their condensation funnel. Normally, the visible funnel forms when moist air is pulled into the tornado's circulation and cools enough for water vapor to condense into that familiar shape. But sometimes, the air is just too dry or warm for that to happen. So instead of a full funnel, you might only see a partial one hanging from the cloud base, or even nothing but swirling dust being picked up. This makes uncondensed tornadoes really deceiving. People watching from a distance might not even realize a tornado is on the ground until they notice debris flying around. In some cases, radar might show strong low-level rotation, but chasers and spotters on the ground might report nothing visible. Uncondensed tornadoes can happen with both supercellular tornadoes and landspouts, though they're more common in drier environments or during times when humidity near the ground isn't high enough for full condensation. They're often on the weaker side, usually in the EF0 to EF1 range, but they can get pretty powerful. One of the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded, the Xenia, Ohio tornado from April 3rd, 1974, was uncondensed at one point during its life. What makes them really dangerous is that people might underestimate them, or not even notice them at all. Imagine just seeing nothing but a dusty swirl off in the distance and assuming it's some sort of weak dust devil or some wind picking up dust, only to find out later it was a real tornado. Uncondensed tornadoes are a good reminder that you shouldn't rely on seeing a tornado before you take shelter. Once you get the warning on your phone or see it on TV, you shouldn't head to the window or step outside to try and spot it. You should seek shelter immediately. It could honestly mean the difference between you surviving or not.